Okay, here we are, getting ready to have a pretty incredible conversation that I'm looking forward to. My new friend Ryan Griffin. We have spent over an hour just connecting prior to hitting record here, and just realizing how much we have in common and mutual friends, and we have a friend that told us we definitely needed to connect, and we probably that part of the conversation will probably come up here at some point. But so yeah, welcome to the Leader Farming Podcast, Ryan. It's an honor to have you here. I look forward to hearing a little bit more of your story as we continue to unpack some of the things that God has done in your life and continuing to do. So why don't we just kick it over and just give us the elevator version of your story and who you are and what you do, and then we'll dive into some of that seasonal growth mindset stuff that we've
Yeah.
talked about.
Yeah. Well, first off, thanks for having me, Zach. I would say, yeah, when Zach says brand new, it's literally as of about an hour ago. So, brand new connection. And when you asked if I would be on the podcast and have a conversation with you, I was like, this guy is very trusting or very chill and laid back or just like high risk tolerance. I'm not sure what it is, but I'm honored and excited to join you today and dive in.
Yeah. Well, thanks for being here. Yeah, I think it's probably a little bit of all of that. I do have a pretty high risk tolerance. I am very trusting and I'm very laid back.
I
So
love it.
I
I
haven't
love
always
it.
been that way. Yeah. So
Yeah.
yeah, tell us a little bit of your story. Who are you? And it's okay to share. I know, like, in our community, that the ministry side of things, we don't always share what we do that much. We use the phrase chimney sweeping with becoming a king folks, but it's okay to share that here. Tell us a little bit about what you do, but we'll start getting into like who you are.
Yeah.
And so yeah, kick it over.
Absolutely. Yeah. So Ryan Griffin, like you said, born and raised in South Georgia. If you're familiar with South Georgia, it's outside of a small town called Tifton, about an hour north of Florida. And I'd say there's two things I would share from kind of how I was raised, where I came from, that really make sense of who I am as well as what I do. I think those are pretty inextricable for me. The first is I grew up on a farm, grew up on my family's farm. It was my grandfather's grandfather's, and my brother took over the family farm. And so grew up working on it, was expected to work on it. Sometimes that was fun, sometimes it wasn't. But nonetheless, the lens that I have today from how I make sense of life to relationships to my faith is a lot about what I understand around the concept of farming. And the flip side is my dad was the first one in the family for generations to move outside of farming profession, and he became a social worker. And when he retired, he was leading several counties across the state in their child protection services, social work efforts. And I would say that combo is a lot of what made me who I am and led me to what I do today. Growing up, observing him in a helping profession, from working with the government to get assistance that our county needed and that the people in our county needed, to actually working with those people, whether that was leaders in our community or families, from someone homeless that could be losing their kids to someone who was willing to take kids and had a family and wanted to take care more. It was anything and everything that you can come up with in your mind that would have to do with that world. I got to watch him serve in those ways. And so when you look at kind of the combination of farming and a helping profession that I got to watch my dad live in as I grew up, as I thought about my faith and how I wanted to live it out as I became older and started asking those questions, those two things really played a big part in it. So young years growing up with that dad in that environment. Went to University of Georgia for undergrad degree in social work. Uh, did that and moved from there to graduate school in Colorado and got a master's in counseling. So you can see the pattern of going towards a helping profession of some sort. And went from that to a few different, I'd say, unconventional moves that I didn't see coming necessarily. But as I was trying to make sense of being in some sort of helping profession, ended up in vocational ministry and nonprofit for a few years, worked for Winship Foundation, one of Chick-fil-A's philanthropic efforts, or I should say the Cathy family's philanthropic efforts. And that introduced me to Chick-fil-A, which is where I'm at today. I would say, kind of long story short, uh, graduate school in counseling, working in nonprofit. When I discovered Chick-fil-A, I didn't know that I would fit or that I would be able to add value to a business. Didn't really understand. I'd say the farming, I understand conceptually. I was like, this is end to end. Like, y'all are the end user of what I did growing up. So I get this, but I've never lived in a business world. But quickly learned that our culture was one that cared about the people and wanted to invest in the people. And so I became interested in learning what business needs they had that I might could come alongside of, and discovered a team called Talent Consulting Team within our corporate office. We call the Support Center. And their goal is to work with our leaders to ensure that they have what they need from a people perspective to lead their business units well, to lead their people well. And so I serve as a coach and consultant to some of our leaders on anything and everything related to people. So we can dive into how that is not only what I do, but it is also a lot of who I am, how I express a lot of what I believe in, my faith, and what I feel called to on a day-to-day basis. So that's story in a nutshell of what I do. Married to a wonderful wife, Rachel, of 13 years. I have to stop and do the math now. So that means
Better
we've
get
been
that right.
married.
This is recorded.
Gotta
You
get it
better get that
right.
right. Yeah.
Make sure she doesn't listen to this so she can't find any errors in what I'm about to say. Rachel and I met in Colorado, but we're both from Georgia. That's another story in and of itself. And have 3 kids. Emery's 9, Wilder's 7, Ellie's 2. Lost one between Wilder and Ellie. That's another story we could dive into at some point. But we have an incredible family that I feel really blessed to be the husband and dad of, and enjoy our life these days. Enjoy being able to work for Chick-fil-A and enjoy the provision they provide so I can take care of the family that the good Lord's given us. So that's introduction in a nutshell.
Yeah.
Maybe a large nutshell.
No, that's great, man. I appreciate you sharing. I think we'll just give a shout out to Alex here for connecting us. So our mutual friend Alex Burton over at Wild at Heart in Colorado gave us just said you guys need to connect. And so we now, after talking for over an hour prior to hitting record, I think we both can attest to why he wanted us to connect, for sure. I think you said
Alex knows I'm dense, so I think he had to tell me like 2 or 3 times, like, this guy Zach Thomas. Like, I've mentioned him to you a couple 3 times now. You all work for the same company, right? He lives like 45 minutes, an hour from you, right? Y'all really need to connect.
yeah,
And we spent the last hour and a half saying, oh, that's why he wanted us to connect.
Yeah,
Alex is a
absolutely.
very integral part of my, I'd say, spiritual journey, especially as I was going from college to kind of adulthood and learning who I was and how I wanted to act out what my calling is. So yeah, huge shout out to Alex and how he's invested in me and you, and it's only representative of how he's invested in the kingdom at large.
Absolutely. Good stuff. Well, let's dive in. I gave you some a little bit of homework in preparation for today, and just thinking about life and how it unfolds. And I think you're the only person that I can recall that's been on the podcast that actually has a farming background.
Mm.
So you may drop some metaphors and analogies that other folks I have to coach them through a little bit, but yeah, we talk about on here just this idea that the world as a whole treats growth as it's just perpetual, like it's
Mm.
just up and to the right, and that there's everything is visually got to be looking better than it was the day before. And what you and I learned growing up on a farm is that that is not the case.
Mhm.
It's very seasonal. And what I believe, God has shown me, and it's a big part of the message that I want to share with others, and continue to share these stories, not just my stories, but other people's stories of how they began to understand how they can grow through really the difficult seasons. In fact, most of our growth comes through the difficult seasons. And just like, in winter, which we're in at the moment, when we look out the window here, it's definitely beyond fall weather. It was really
Mhm.
cold this week. Um, but just knowing that there's things going on underneath the surface. There's a lot of roots deepening,
Mhm.
and so as we use that metaphor to talk about our lives, I'd love for you to share a story about your life and where you feel like winter has come upon you, whether it's a long winter or short winter, or and just how that's played out in your life, and then how you've come to learn that you're growing through that, and looking back and seeing what God's doing in your life through that.
Yeah. No, it's a very thought-provoking question, and it's also I'd say a accurate and interesting observation of like, hey, this is how God designed nature to happen.
Mhm.
Might it be that this is applicable? And not only applicable, but it's like, does this may just happen to us as well.
Mhm.
It
Mhm.
may be by design. And so if it's by design, how do we steward that reality well? So I love the question because it really got me thinking about, does that happen to us? And I think it does. And what do we do with that? So as I started thinking about this question, Zach, there are definitely moments in time, whether that's a day or a week uh, or a month, that I can look back on and say that was a winter. Like it was cold, it was dark. Like that was a winter. And we could dive into some of those, but I also, as I was reflecting on winter in my life, something that came to mind was the fact that I do think there is a rhythmic pattern, at least that I've begun discovering in my adult life, that I do think feels seasonal, in the sense that there are uh, rhythmic winters. And it's not just, man, that was a hard season. Like my wife and I are having a hard time in our marriage for a season, or we're dealing with this difficulty with a child for a season. It's outside of just the hard stuff that makes for the story. There's just a rhythmic pattern of winter that, as I reflect on my adulthood, I have found myself in at a pretty almost predictable basis. And I would describe it like this. And you can pause me and ask questions if it doesn't make sense, because the question that you asked has kind of triggered me beginning to make sense of this myself, even. So I'm maybe
Mhm.
some self discovery in the process here.
Yeah.
Um, I would describe it as just the day you come home and you don't feel like, or you wonder if you even earned your paycheck. Like you got the
Mm.
work done, there's nothing actually standing out that's just blatantly wrong in life or hard in life. It's just, I don't feel like I really earned it today,
Mm,
or I don't feel like I really left it all on the field today. Or did anybody notice the impact that I'm making or hoping that I'm making? Or am I actually making an impact right now? Um, I have found that there's a bit of a pattern, whether it's a day or a week or sometimes even longer, where I find myself asking those questions for whatever reasons. And usually it's because there's either a slower season at work or not a lot exciting is happening in the home life. There's no like, oh, this is pointing me to the fact that I'm knocking it out of the park in my marriage. Or, man, my kid's just winning on all fronts. So I feel like a great dad. It could just be in the normal, mundane, every day. I just wonder, am I really carrying out the calling that the Lord's put on my life?
mm,
And I have found in those moments that it's usually mental margin that I have that has caused me to ask those questions. And I have this bit of a, as I look at it in retrospect, these moments that I would call almost like a breath or a pause in the grind of the everyday. And when I have that breath, I may have not taken it on purpose, uh, or I have that pause in the midst of the grind. It's almost like my mind is not conditioned to stop and just acknowledge there's an opportunity for a pause right
mm.
now. You don't have to just leave it on the field every day. You're going to have to leave it on the field. It's coming. But today was just a chance to pause, or in this moment or in this week, there was a chance to pause and breathe. And I have found that I'm not as conditioned as I'd like to be in recognizing those breaths, those moments, for what they are. I question my
Yeah.
purpose in life pretty quickly. Like, am I doing what I'm supposed to be doing right now?
Yeah.
And then on the back end of it, when that pause, when I hit play again, when life hits play, the kids hit play, work hits play, and I'm grinding it out again, I look back and kind of regret that I didn't take advantage of the pause, but
Mm,
rather I kind of questioned my existence, or I wondered if I was earning it. It's like, you were gonna, like, yes, you are, but you missed the moment. Like, winter came and went, and you tried to make it spring the whole time.
mm,
Like, you were
mm.
trying to plant during winter, you were trying to harvest during winter. Like, it was just a pause.
Yeah.
And you need to take that pause for what it's worth. I'd say back home, uh, a couple things come to mind. Harvest, we didn't call fall. We called it
Mm,
harvest season. Like, it's
mm-hmm.
harvest.
Mm-hmm.
And most often, if I hear the question right, Zach, it's like, it's almost like we put pressure on ourselves to harvest all year long.
Oh yeah.
And I would say harvest is the hardest. Like, harvest season is the hardest season. And it's really, I think, by design that winter comes directly after, because winter
Mm-hmm.
should be for recovery.
Mm-hmm.
If anybody has ever experienced something like CrossFit, it's similar to like harvest. It's like you just run hard, you work hard, you leave it all on the field. And if you're anything like me, uh, like I started wearing a Garmin watch a couple of years ago, and the watch, depending on the level of effort that I put into a workout, tells me how many hours I need for my recovery.
Mm.
And that's such a good, like, literal reminder of, I think, a spiritual truth. It's like, hey, you went hard, you need 54 hours of recovery, and if you try to go that hard again tomorrow, it's not going to work well for you.
Wow.
And I think to it's a similar concept in this sense, that harvest season is the hardest season, so winter does come directly after. Use it for recovery. Like, you went hard on the farm, the equipment broke because we pushed it hard. The ground is stripped of its nutrients because we asked it to produce every bit of fruit that it possibly could. And winter is not just recovery for me, it's recovery for the equipment, it's recovery for the soil. It's that pause.
Yeah.
And so, long answer to your question, as I've thought about this, I think I've noticed a rhythm in my own life that's, I think the more I pay attention to it, maybe the more predictable it could become, that I find myself in those winter moments, but I'm hard on myself in them because I don't feel like I'm producing. But if I can give myself permission to recover, the production is going to be all the better on the back end of that versus me regretting that I didn't really take advantage of it. So I'll pause there for a second. What comes to
Mhm.
mind? How do you respond or react to that?
No, that is good. You know, for the really for the first time, really, I think on the podcast in this conversation, the thought to connect, and maybe it's because of what I'm reading right now. I'm reading uh, uh, John Mark Comer's book, Ruthless Elimination of Hurry,
Yeah.
and just recently finished the chapter on Sabbath. But you know, so making that connection between Sabbath and winter,
Mm,
you know, when you think about, I mean, that's really what Sabbath is, you know. I mean, it's that resting period, and yeah, things literally, leaves fall to the ground and die, and decay and produce nutrients for, you know, future growth. But also it's a different kind of growth. The word growth just elicits, in your mind, like it's got to be upward and outward, but
mm,
it's inward and deeper is what we're talking about here. And so that pause, that you know, winter, that Sabbath, you know, which should come weekly, for us. I think, you know, God designed that in the fabric of our week. Thankfully, you and I work for a company that doesn't operate 24/7, um, and has a somewhat of a Sabbath. And you know, it is so important to our internal operating system,
mm-hmm.
our soul, our design to take Sabbath. And to your point, you're given a Sabbath. It's almost like it happens, and then you tend to look at it as like, oh well, I don't feel like I gave it my all, or you know, and I think maybe in some ways, you know, that may be, a psychological standpoint, or from, you know, what the ministry that you and I, are both connected to. We would say, you know, the enemy is, trying to put in your head like, oh, you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
you're not enough, you're not do, and that's because he doesn't want you to ever turn it off, right? Because he knows that it'll kill you, right? And so, but what I'm as you were talking, really for the first time, I connected Sabbath to winter,
Mm,
and just how it's just a different kind of growth,
it is.
um, and it's essential, it's important, it's as important as any other kind of growth that leads to harvest, um, but we don't value it, and
Yeah.
as a result, we tend to beat ourselves up about it, because we feel like we're not being productive. Um, so man, that's really helpful, you know, for me to hear you tell your story and talk about that, and it really connects the importance of Sabbath to, um, to growth, and connecting that to this idea of winter. So.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that you made the connection to Sabbath. I mean, Sabbath is a very predictable cadence that we can take advantage of and are called to take advantage of as Christ followers. And I think even in the moments that you have those pauses in work, whether it's slow or you're just questioning, like, did I really leave it all on the field today? Because it might not have been as gangbusters as you thought it was going to be that day. Those are also Sabbath moments, if you can recognize it as, I don't need to be hard on myself in this moment. Use it to take a pause, to take a breath.
Mm-hmm.
It would be ridiculous for me to try to get crops to grow in the wintertime and to be hard on myself that they weren't sprouting. And I mean, Lord forbid if it got warm enough in the winter for something to actually sprout, it would freeze pretty soon and die, or wouldn't get the amount of moisture it needed or get too much. Like, crops aren't meant to grow in the winter.
Yeah.
But if you have like one of the crops that my brother grows now is pecan trees or pecan trees, if you live north of Macon, I guess. Uh,
I'm tracking with you.
you have no fruit, and you shouldn't expect it, but you absolutely need to recognize that those roots are going deeper and getting ready
Mm-hmm.
for the next season. And that is the absolute most productive thing that could be happening, even though you can't see it. And it probably feels like you're not doing anything. I mean, he earns a paycheck once a year. And so he's probably looking at those trees in the wintertime. Yeah, I got to wait for 11 more months until I can cash in on these things.
Yeah.
But if you're patient, knowing that rather than trying to force some productivity in the wrong season, that it's going to come in its own time because those roots are growing deeper. While it looks like you're doing nothing, you're actually doing the thing you need to be productive when the time comes, so you can cash in next
Yeah.
harvest.
Here's a question and here's a thought. And I think you'll know where I'm going with this, but so what do you think about greenhouses? Like manufacturing an environment for growth in a winter season. Like, and obviously there's nothing inherently wrong with
Yeah.
greenhouses. But from a metaphor standpoint, like
Yeah.
what have we done? What are we doing? And where are the greenhouses in our lives that we've built and created that don't allow us to rest, that don't allow us to to grow inward and deeper, because we
Mm,
built a greenhouse over that particular area of our lives.
I love that question. That is such a good, like, we could unpack that for a while.
Yeah.
I mean, what comes to mind for me as I'm just processing out loud is, uh, one, this is a truth or an assumption. You check me on it. That we were created to create.
Hmm.
Um, and if that's the case, uh, we're also very creative in how productive we can be with the creations that we're called to. And I think humans will get as creative as we can at making sure that we can be as productive as possible with creating greenhouses everywhere.
Hmm.
Um, and a greenhouse in and of itself is not a bad thing, but it's how you use it. It causes you to have to think about what's your motive behind what you're putting in the greenhouse for
Yeah.
the wintertime. Is it to protect it from the cold so that it can live? Or is it to try to get
Mm.
a little bit more productivity out of it than it was actually designed for? Like, could I get this thing to produce 12 months out of the year instead of 3 months out of the year?
Yeah.
Um, and I think we will get as creative as we can for what we can get out of everything else, every, like,
Yeah.
plants, people, however it is. Um, it begs the question, is that the best thing to do?
Yeah.
You will profit from that, but to what end?
Yeah.
I think it's a really good question to pause and think about. What greenhouses do I have? I think about, um, since COVID, the technology in the workplace has increased enough to where I don't have to go into the office to get my work done. And so that's a really good thing,
Hmm.
partly because I can be more present with my family while I'm getting work done, I can have lunch with my kids in the summertime and then go back to my office and get a little bit of work done. Flip side of that is I could work during dinner time at night
Yeah.
instead of
Yeah.
having dinner with my kids. That's a bit of a greenhouse effect, so to speak. So I could be
Yeah.
productive all the time versus I didn't have to I didn't have to decide what my boundaries were in a earlier season because they were set for me based on the constraints of technology or whatever it might be. But now
Hmm.
that those constraints don't exist, I have to be disciplined in when I'm productive and how productive I am because you can be as productive as you want to be, but it could
Yeah.
be to your detriment. Like you could be fruitful, but the roots aren't growing deeper. And eventually that
Yeah.
tree's going to die or the wind's going to blow enough to where it's going to fall over.
Yeah. Man, just having this conversation with you led me to that question. Like I've never asked that question before. And so I think that's a question that I'm going to have to sit with for quite some
Mm,
time. Like
me plus.
where have I built greenhouses in my life? Um, yeah, and what you share, just man, that's just so good. Technology has allowed us to just work around the clock. I mean, there's no end to it. Well, brother, I try to keep these things to about 30 minutes, just because of people's attention spans. So
Understood.
uh,
even
let's
even though they know by now we could probably pontificate for quite a while.
oh, certainly, but I'm no Joe Rogan or anything to keep somebody's attention
No
for
long
an
form.
yeah, long form. Um, let's bring this to a close with I'd like for you to just reflect on the question. Like, all right, you are how old are you again? Remind me.
39.
39. All right, so you're 39 years old and you're talking to your 18, 19, 20-year-old self. What do you want to tell 18-year-old Ryan that he needs to have a heads up about or just something uh that has transpired between 18 and 39, that you want him to know about, that he needs to be ready for, or and so we frame that question because I shared with you earlier, I hope that, my team members and other young folks are listening to this. And
Mm-hmm.
that's really the reason I started these conversations, is because, we're, we're just a few steps down the road. We've experienced
Yeah.
some things, we've seen some things, and I like to have these conversations with guys in this decade, to just share some wisdom and some thoughts with those. So if you're talking to your 18-year-old self, what would you say? What
Yeah.
advice would you give him?
Such a good question. Thanks for asking. A couple things come to mind immediately. The first is I'd probably tell myself, don't be so hard on yourself.
Mm,
This is kind of in the vein of the rhythmic pattern, the seasons that I expect everybody will experience that I'm discovering in my uh, adulthood has happened. If I could have discovered it earlier, it's you are gonna have seasons, and that's not a bad thing.
mm-hmm.
It's by design. Uh, Live through each season well as they happen. Don't try to grit through one and get to the next one just because spring's a little bit warmer and more pleasant. Like winter is a blessing to embrace, not a burden
Yeah,
to bear, so to speak.
yeah,
So don't be so hard on yourself in the seasons that you may not think are speaking to your search for significance as much as you want. Like just live in the season and know who has made you and where your significance actually lies, and live through each season well. And I'd say similar to that, don't be so hard on yourself. Also reminded of something Solomon says in Ecclesiastes. He says something to the effect of find joy. And I think another translation says satisfaction. Find joy and satisfaction in the work of your hands.
Mm.
And joy and satisfaction don't go hand in hand with gritting through it or having a burden to bear. It's if you find joy in the work of your hands and in what's happening in every season, you're kind of working and serving from a place of abundance versus a place of scarcity. The fun part of that is kind of the find. It assumes a bit of an adventure, a treasure hunt. It's like, what in this that God's calling me to in this season is enjoyable and satisfying? And so find it, because it is there. I think it's in Psalms where I think David says something to the effect of, it's the joy of God to conceal a matter and the joy of kings to search it out. Like, the joy and satisfaction is there. Your significance is there in Christ. He wants you to find it. And so in every season, find that joy and find that satisfaction. And don't be so hard on yourself.
So good, man. Well, that's a great way to finish this up. So honored to have you here. Really grateful for your time. I look forward to seeing where God's going to move this friendship, this relationship. Definitely connected for a reason. We have Alex to thank for that.
Sir.
So yeah, good stuff. All right. Well,
appreciate you, brother.